Hi everyone and welcome to Pixels, a podcast for the discerning gamer. Hello everyone and welcome back to Pixels. This is a show where we cover the news from the video games industry. We give you impressions about the games we've been playing, analyze some of the news we've been hearing about, and today I am doing the show alone because my schedule is still kind of messed up. I missed the episode from last week, but I did want to give you a quick update when I have time and when the giant diapers and cries are not looming over me like an end boss from a very difficult game. So I have a little bit of time now, so I jumped on the recorder and I'm going to be talking about the games I've played and some of the interesting news that we've heard about. The games are Monster Hunter World, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Celeste, which I want to talk about. I do want to cover as well the news from the Xbox Game Pass changes and some of the rumors flying around Microsoft's intention in the game sector and some other little tidbits. But first, let's jump in with the big juggernaut of January. I think, 2016 was a really good year for gaming. And 2017, as we've said repeatedly all over, every kind of possible media and everyone's list, 2017 was incredible. I think 2018 is starting pretty well as well. We have some updates mostly from Japan, and we've had Capcom's Street Fighter Arcade Edition, which was pretty cool, a couple of other minor things, but again from Capcom we've had Monster Hunter World that came out on the 26th, and it's already sold 6 million units, which for a game like this and for a company like Capcom is absolutely not insignificant. It is definitely managing to fulfill the promise of showing the qualities and the interest and the hooks that a game like Monster Hunter can have to a wider audience. And that is a huge opportunity for the company. Monster Hunter, for those who don't remember, started off a long time ago. I think it was 2004. It came out on PS2, if I'm not mistaken, and it started a trend from PS2 to PSP, where it really exploded, and then on to 3DS, where it kept its luster in Japan. It was very, very popular in Japan, still is. Drove a lot of PlayStation 4 sales when it came out a few weeks ago. And, you had the typical scenes of people queuing for their reservations, and then people queuing to be able to make a reservation to get it when it's available. Japan is not big on digital purchases. They certainly do it, but apparently not as much as they could, which doesn't really make sense to me when the game is not available in store. It's selling so well, but anyway, that's a different story. So it's always been huge in Japan, but it's becoming not as huge certainly, but definitely more accessible, or making more of a splash, more of an impact in the West as well now. Everyone I've heard talk about this game has been singing its praises, from the traditional media to the independent media like YouTubers and that kind of thing, to the players themselves. I don't think I've heard from any person who's played a good amount of that game who was not at least saying, yeah, it's pretty cool. And many people are saying, I'm completely in love with it. I've spent dozens, if not over 100 hours into it. So I think it's legitimate for people to wonder, if you haven't jumped in already, is this game going to be for you? And that's something I always like to do. I like to take an approach that is maybe a little bit more a little bit more at a distance, take a couple of steps back from the hype and try to analyze the game in a way that is more cold and neutral, and try to see who that game is actually going to be for. Because as good as it is, and it is good, I don't think it is for everyone. And I haven't completed the game, so this isn't really a review. It's more like first impressions, as I often do in this show. I've played about, I don't know, 15 hours of the game. I've completed the first leg, like the first, for those who have played through it. It's not a huge part, but it's up to the point where you go against the Elder Dragon for the first time. So it's still, a significant amount of time, and I'm enjoying it, which is already very different from the experiences I've had with previous Monster Hunter games. I'm definitely enjoying it. I want to play more. I'm getting the loop. I understand what the fun is, where the fun is. The way I describe it is, I think, not perfect, and certainly you could poke holes into this comparison, but it also can help people understand what it is. It's basically, to me, a kind of Diablo-like boss rush game, meaning in 3D and over third-person view and in an expansive open world, or almost open, but you really have this mechanic of going against bosses. You have very little. You can go and kill the smaller monsters and go on, farming for materials and components for your crafting. But the core of the game is those bosses. That is most of what you're going to be doing, killing those huge creatures, and you get material from them, and then you craft armor and you get loot. You get loot, even if it doesn't just drop immediately. You get components to craft some armor and weapons to go against stronger monsters. And it feels Diablo-ish in that loot grind kind of part, and it feels boss rushy in the attention to the different monsters you have to pay. You really have to be careful with the way you engage with the monster, and make sure that you're hitting the right parts and noticing the patterns and things like that. So that part is definitely fun, and maybe I'm gonna get to a point where I just can't stop playing and I completely fall in love with the game like so many others have. I'm not there yet. For now, it's just a fun game. And there are some pitfalls to the game as well. There are some definite negative aspects to it. So before, I was almost going to forget. I do want to talk about the Dark Soulsiness of it. And I know some people get a little bit, irked when you mention that there is some Dark Souls elements to the game, especially since I've actually realized Monster Hunter predates the first Dark Souls. So if anything, it's the other way around, and Dark Souls might have been inspired by this game, but it's still, the one that is iconic in the area is Dark Souls. And that, what I'm talking about is, in the fights, the controls are very slow, very deliberate. The animations take very long. With some of the weapons you can use in Monster Hunter, there are 14 of them, and they are extremely different. Some of them are fast, but many of them are relatively slow. And some of the animations for a move are going to be, 3 seconds before you actually hit get the hit registered, and then another 2 or 3 seconds to get out of the animation. So you can't just go in, willy-nilly and just hit around everything. Some of the weapons can, but even then you're going to engage into combos that are a little bit too long for comfort if you want to make sure you're hitting the right thing or not getting stuck into the animation and then getting hit by the mob because it's taking too long for you to do anything or to roll around. So there is definitely some element of Dark Souls in the controls. Of course, the games are very different, but there is some of that. Some of the weapons are very different. So if that's not your jam, you might want to try another weapon, but there is definitely that aspect of it, and the fact that you have to learn the patterns of the monsters and stuff like that. So all of this is the good parts. Some of the bad parts, I think, are never mentioned, and they are kind of astounding. It is an incredibly Japanese games, and it shows in most, I think, in the menus and the UI and even the UX. it is abysmal. Like, nothing makes sense. Everything is convoluted. The different placements of the menus and the way you access them, and some of the options are buried into menus that make no logical sense. They shouldn't be there. They are really important, but you have to press 4 buttons to get to them. It is obtuse. So that aspect is really, you get used to it, but it's really fighting you to allow you to use the game. Now, where it's not fighting you anymore, where it's a lot more accessible, is to enjoy the core of the game. So that's the important part. But there is definitely a part of me that experiencing the game feels like, wow, if you had, investigated or given this part, the UI, to a Western developer, they would have made this so much, more accessible. And I'm not talking about the core of the game, because obviously the core of the game is very Japanese and should be, should have that feel. But the UI part, I think, has no reason to be that complicated and that convoluted. So that is definitely a frustration element. Then there's the onboarding of the different functions. You really have to fight through a maze to get to them. And what does the ecological research do, and where do you access it, and how do you pay with points, or pay with like research points, or pay with money? What do the two different currencies do? And like, you won't get this until like 5 or 10 hours in, and there's no reason for that. The way you you enter a mission is by going to a quest board and posting a quest. And then if it's a story quest, you can't call for help. Like, you have to actually call for help, but you can't do this until the first cinematic part is over, like the first part of the mission is over, and when you start the hunt of the monster proper. So a lot of this is ridiculous with no good reason for it being that way. But again, I keep repeating myself. I think this is something that you can, look past and enjoy the game. And this is the kind of game that, if you're a core gamer, I think I could recommend it to anyone if you're at least curious about it. If you think, wow, this is definitely not for me, then obviously you can skip it. But it's such a phenomenon, and it's definitely an interesting kind of thing. It's in that area with probably, again, I'm going to mention Dark Souls because it's a little bit niche, but the people who love it really love it. And I think you should experience it at least once if you want, for your general culture as a gamer. And you'll get some joy out of it. It's not as, I think, there are some games that you don't get joy out of, even if you end up understanding them. I think this one is not that. It's something that you can definitely enjoy. So I would recommend it if you're at least a little bit interested in this, and if you're into the hype, if you're jumping on the hype train of Monster Hunter World. So it's a good experience, and I've been enjoying it. I'm going to be playing it more. In some ways, some people have been drawing the comparison to Destiny 2 as well, or Destiny in general. There is some relation there. The grind, the going to do the same thing over and over again. It can become what some people call a lifestyle game. It becomes your game, and that's what you play. I mean, at least to a certain extent. So yeah, anyway, Monster Hunter World, pretty cool game. Very happy that I can finally get into that genre, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other developers do in that genre, because I think we might be seeing more of it. Dauntless is a game that is going to be released hopefully first half of 2018, made by Western developers and free to play. It might be a little bit more too simplified. It's in beta at the moment, but we'll see what happens. And I would love to see that kind of game become even more accessible than Monster Hunter World is. All right, so that's it for Monster Hunter World, and I do want to touch on Dragon Ball FighterZ, and that is, by the way, the official pronunciation of that game's name, and it sold 2 million units already. definitely a successful game. As we've talked about in the past, incredible graphics wise, fighting mechanics wise, it is also quite fun. It's one of those, anime Arc Systems games that it has a specific type of gameplay for fighting games. It's not as precise, I think, as something like Street Fighter or King of Fighters, those kinds of games. But it definitely has its place. It has some technicality to it. And that being said, it is unlike Monster Hunter World. I don't think it's a game I can recommend to everyone. I think if you're a Dragon Ball fan, then absolutely you should jump in. It's just so much fun to be able to play your character in that way. If you're a fighting game hardcore fan, if you want to play all of the fighting games, I think you can jump in and have some fun as well in this one. And the surprise for it is that the single player campaign is actually pretty solid. I've played through about a third of it. There are 3 arcs. I did the first one, and it's actually quite fun. It's campy. It's not, the best narrative you'll ever see, but it is a fun jump into the world of Dragon Ball, and it's quite faithful to the anime and to the, it does a lot of fan service. So it's that part I wasn't expecting. And I'm pleasantly surprised. And unlike Monster Hunter World, where some of the fights take, 30, 40 minutes, in this one, I can actually press pause. In Monster Hunter, I can't really pause, but here I can pause and see what's wrong with the baby and change the diaper, so that's a plus as well. And talking about the 2 million units sold, I do want to mention that to give you an idea of scale, Street Fighter V, which did very badly when it first launched because of all of the problems it had, only reached the 2 million mark sometime around the end of last year, of 2017. And that was almost 2 years in. So for a game like Dragon Ball FighterZ, it's definitely a success. And lastly, I did want to mention Celeste, which, again, a lot of people have been talking about and is a super interesting entry in the what people call a die and retry type of game. It is those really punishing, mechanically precise games where you have to be incredibly skilled at the mechanics of the game to get through it. It's usually platformers, and it's not uncommon that you have spikes in all but like 2 places of the screen, and those are the places you have to reach. And so those games have never been my jam. You can think of things like Super Meat Boy and things like that. They've never been my jam because it seemed to me like they relished in the player's failure. They would celebrate the masochistic aspect of the game and put your head into your failures and show you how bad you are and how hard the game is. And that was a point of pride of the game itself. Celeste is not that. Celeste is going out of its way to almost reassure you, but at the very least welcome you and sort of reward you for your successes rather than mocking you for your failures. And not only that, but it also has an easy mode where it's telling you, listen, the game is supposed to be challenging. That's how it was conceived. But if you don't feel like playing it that way, if you don't have time or energy, or just you don't want to, we have an easy mode where you can do things like, slow down time and make it, give you more energy and jumps and whatever, so that you can actually enjoy the game at your own pace. And that's okay. It's perfectly fine. You also have parts of the, so it's obviously a platformer, and you have to traverse each of the levels, and you just restart every time you die at that level. So if you've progressed through like 5 levels on that chapter, you're just going to restart at that specific screen. It's even more than levels. It's like just one screen. And when you pass, you're saved to that next screen, which is also very welcoming and very therapeutic for those kinds of games. And so you have little strawberries you can get that are a little bit more difficult to access. And they tell you, listen, those strawberries, they're good for impressing your friends, but if you don't want to get them, don't feel like you have to. Again, a welcoming, heartwarming kind of approach to that kind of game. And it's still challenging, you know. It is just as challenging as any of those other games. So it's not like it's baby mode, although you can activate the easy mode, but it's not holding you by the hand all the way through and doing it for you. It's still forcing you to learn the mechanics and to get better as a player, not as a character, to get better as a player mechanically for those things. So I think it's a great entry in that genre. And on top of that, there is a story that is quite touching. I haven't played as much as I have those other two games, so I'm still maybe a couple of hours in. But there's a story, there's poetry to it. The main character, Madeline, that has to climb an impossibly difficult to climb mountain, and that does it for reasons that are very personal, and that is confronted with her own demons, almost literally in the game. It has some really valuable storytelling elements and story feeling elements to it that I think are a treasure. And the game is available on Switch, which is probably the best platform to play it on because it's super like snacky gameplay. You can try a level for like 5-10 minutes, pass a couple of levels of screens, and then put it down. So the Switch is probably the platform you want to be playing it on, even though it's available on others as well. So yeah, Celeste, and as I was saying, Monster Hunter World, Dragon Ball Z, Celeste, and a couple of others already make for an incredible start of the year. And as we'll see in the second part of the show, the year is really just starting now. We're going to have a lot more coming in the next few months. And so 2018 might be another one of those incredible gaming years. Maybe I can't imagine this is going to continue forever, but we are hitting a pretty happy patch in the past few years. The other big news I wanted to talk about was the Xbox and Microsoft's strategy shift. Apparently, there are a couple of elements to that. First, the Xbox Game Pass, which is a service where you pay, I think it's $10 a month, and that's on top of your Xbox Live subscription. So that's to take into account. But the Xbox Game Pass allows you to install games so you have a number of games in the library that are available, 100, 200, whatever that is, and you can install them and play them for as long as you are subscribed. It's kind of like the PlayStation Now, except instead of streaming the games as you do on PlayStation Now, you actually install them so you don't have lag or bandwidth issues with your connection. So that service is being modified to include all of the first-party exclusive games that Microsoft is going to have on the console into the service day one when they launch. And that is like, it's half pretty big, half kind of underwhelming. The pretty big part is obviously this makes this kind of service incredibly attractive price-wise, because if you have a first-party developer that produces a lot, and those are usually the games you do want to play on that platform, and they're available for $10 a month, $10 a month, that's $120 a year, 2 games. And if you buy 2 games a year, those games, then it becomes interesting financially. If you buy them new, obviously. So that's a big deal. The half disappointing part, obviously, is that the Xbox exclusives are not very numerous or super platform buying level of excitement. The ones we're going to see in the near future are Sea of Thieves, which is getting more positive impressions and reviews from people who are playing the beta, so that might be cool. You have State of Decay 2, again, a somewhat interesting game, but not a system seller, and Crackdown 3, which we're getting sort of tired to wait for, and it's getting a little bit worrisome that it's been delayed that much with so little communication. So not the best of lineups, but in the future, it could become a service that is very valuable. It does beg the question of, there are 2 questions for the industry. First, the retailers are very upset about this, because it's like, well, okay, then no one ever buys games anymore if that becomes the standard, and that's certainly a problem for them. Might be saying the world has to move on, but yeah, that's something to take into account. The other thing is, if that becomes the standard, if basically subscription service becomes the standard in video games as well, as they have in, with Netflix and Spotify and all of those, what becomes of the business model? Like, how do developers make enough money? Do they make enough money? How do you distribute that amount? Because $10 spread over, 100 developers, that might not be as much as they would hope. That being said, some developers or publishers have been saying that PlayStation Now is not negligible anymore. It doesn't mean it's a big portion of the revenue, but it's slowly getting there. And Microsoft has said that they do want to improve or to start a service similar to PlayStation Now, so game streaming, within the next 3 years. They even bought PlayFab, yes, which is a cloud-based gaming platform. So they're working on it as well. So subscription gaming is probably in our future, at least as an option, very soon on many different platforms. Obviously, the advantage of this, which, by the way, the Xbox Game Pass is, if I'm not mistaken, also active on PC, or at least that's the intention. So that's good if you don't have an Xbox. But the streaming with video streaming, like PlayStation Now and what Microsoft is probably developing in the future, means that you can play those games without owning the console or even a powerful machine, a powerful PC. So that's pretty cool as well. And the other thing that Microsoft has been rumored to be doing is be on the hunt for studios to buy. And that is incredibly good news, I think, for Xbox fans and gaming fans in general. Because as we've been complaining about for the past couple of years, the big problem with the Xbox is the lack of exclusives. And if Microsoft gets studios, it will be to get those exclusives. There's been rumors about companies like EA and Valve. Valve, I don't really believe the thing is, Valve is a private company. They're not stock listed. So it would mean that they would basically, Gabe Newell would have to want to sell to Microsoft. And by the way, he is a former Microsoft employee, so maybe there's a connection there, but I don't see why he would want to sell unless he just wants to retire. Maybe he wants to start another gaming company just to make games and not manage a store. So that could be an exit. I don't know, but it doesn't seem very likely. EA, maybe. I mean, it would take a lot of cash. Microsoft has announced, Satya Nadella has said that he wants to basically be a bigger player in the gaming market. So maybe they're going to engage a lot of the Microsoft hoard of cash into that. EA definitely does have a lot of IPs available to it. I don't know. What's for sure is that Microsoft needs exclusives, and it would take a lot of time to go out and build up the studios from the ground up. So buying studios would make a lot more sense, and it seems that's what they're looking at, or at least that's what the rumors are saying, and the rumors seem to be from somewhat reliable sources. So that, I look at this as a very good sign. So yeah, good things happening, hopefully, in the future for Microsoft. It's not going to be an immediate change, though. It's not going to happen, not this year. It's not going to have an impact this year. All right, let's move on to smaller little tidbits of news. And let's start with a few dates. First, God of War is going to be released on April 20th. That is incredibly exciting. I'm really hoping that that game manages to break from the adolescence, teenage violence / sex fest. Well, sex fest is a little bit of an exaggeration, but there were certainly some racy moments in the initial games, and grows up into something a little bit more substantial. And that is an opportunity that was missed by, I think, a number of games before. Arguably, Tomb Raider has managed to make that transition, but games like Gears of War have not. So God of War has an opportunity there, and I'm very excited to find out if it manages to actually do it. Then we have a delay for Red Dead Redemption 2. It was supposed to come out this spring. It is going to be delayed to October 26th. So we have an actual date, which means it's much more likely to actually come out at that point. I'm sure some people are disappointed that it's not coming out sooner, but there you go. There's going to be a crazy fall, as every fall always is. And we also have a few leaks from Red Dead Redemption that suggest it might have a number of different online modes, and one of them would be a battle royale, which, as we know, is the flavor du jour. Hope you're enjoying my English pronunciation of a French word. So, yeah, we have a Battle Royale mode. Seems like it could happen. First-person mode, a bunch of other things. This is a leak, but it seems like it might have some legs. And, yeah, I guess it's not unexpected that Red Dead Redemption is going to have a very solid online component, given the success of GTA 5's online component, which, by the way, GTA 5 is still selling. It's now reached 90 million units sold, which the game came out in 2013. It's 5 years old. It is an incredible success. Of course, it came out on the previous generation, so a lot of people might have bought it twice, but still, 90 millions. 5 years later, it's still selling millions, if not dozens of millions of games. So, very impressive success, and GTA Online is certainly not, is certainly one of the reasons behind that success. So you can bet that Red Dead Redemption 2 is going to have a very solid online mode as well. Anthem was delayed to 2019. EA has confirmed what was initially a rumor, and the rumor also was accompanied by ramblings by the developers that were saying the date of, the launch window of fall 2018 was never realistic, even when it was first announced at E3 2017. So it was always going to be delayed, and it's not delayed, probably not enormously. It's probably going to be coming out fiscal year 2018, which means end of March 2019. So that's maybe 5 months of a delay. So not a huge amount, but still enough time to polish some of the systems. And some people might suggest, well, maybe they're removing loot boxes because of the Star Wars Battlefront 2 debacle from last year. Might be the case. I think there's more of a intention to make it very polished, to take the opportunity of capturing a user base that is maybe dissatisfied with some other games like Destiny 2, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But before we do, a word about Battlefront 2 and the loot boxes issue. It missed its target by 1 million. So it was targeted for 10 million sales. It reached 9 million. The first one made 14, I think. So it's not, a complete bust. Certainly the loot box controversy was an issue. But it didn't do too badly either. And I think it's worth taking a second to notice the scale here. We have 9 million sold, which is a missing targets for a game like Battlefront 2, which has huge ambition and a huge budget. And we have games that we mentioned earlier, like Monster Hunter World and Dragon Ball FighterZ. Dragon Ball FighterZ selling 2 million is a big success for that game. Monster Hunter World selling 6 million actually, is a huge success for Capcom and for that game. It might go on to sell a lot more. But, those are not the big blockbuster AAA games that we're talking about when we're talking about the biggest players in the gaming world. They are probably more around, if you want to classify them, probably around the AA kind of production level. They're not as ambitious in their, cinematics, storytelling, length, maybe not length. That's not a good measure, but, Monster Hunter World, for example, the narrative aspect is incredibly bare bones. There are very few animations. Everything is very few voices. The budget is much more modest. So anyway, just to exemplify the fact that when we're talking about the cost and the budgets of games, a lot of people often say, well, see, you have this game that works perfectly well without loot boxes or DLC or selling anything. It's just a complete game on the disc, blah, blah, blah. It's not the same category of games. And I think a lot of people the more angry gamers among us tend to not see or not even want to see that difference. So anyway, just a passing remark. Battlefront 2, 9 million instead of 10. Destiny 2 will have a major expansion this coming year in 2018, something probably akin to the Taken King, like we had in Destiny 1. Hopefully, it will fix a lot of the lingering issues of Destiny 2, and it remains a mystery to me how Bungie could have bungled Destiny 2 so badly after having seemingly learned so much from the bungle of Destiny 1, which was corrected with the expansion, The Taken King, and they found some really clever ways of engaging and keeping players interested over the life of The Taken King. But anyway, so that is one note, but the more interesting part of this is the report from Activision that actually they sold more of Destiny 2 than Destiny 1. That's understandable, but they also sold more of the first expansion, the small DLC from December, and the user base is more engaged than it was in Destiny 1. So for all of the complaints, and we always do that, we always have that issue, we get very vocal, but then things don't translate into the commercial aspect of it, and people keep playing or keep buying those things. So it's another example of the vocal minority, which it seems, maybe they're playing with the numbers here, but it seems that even in the case of Destiny 2, where I assure you, for having my pulse on the beat of the community, my finger on the pulse, there you go, that's the expression, on the pulse of the community, they are not happy at all, like to a level that is very different from previously. Like they feel betrayed, and things are slowly getting better, but it was bad. But still, people are playing and paying for the game. So yeah, it's kind of something to keep in mind. And just as it is for Battlefront 2, where people have been enjoying it quite a bit. Of course, they removed the loot crates, the loot boxes, in the end after the controversy. But I think a lot of the more casual players I've been hearing from have been enjoying the game and don't really even care or know about the loot crates, and they wouldn't have worried about that. They just jump in and have fun. And that is, we all know they're there, those players, but I think the silent majority is much more of a majority than we imagine in our microcosm of very engaged core gamers. Graphics cards, they have been having big issues because of Bitcoin mining, and the manufacturers are starting to notice and to do something about it. But they're kind of in a catch-22 because they can't really mass produce lots of graphics card to meet the demand because that demand is incredibly unstable. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies could crash tomorrow, and the miners would not find it financially viable to buy the graphics cards they're buying now. So the prices are inflated today for the graphics card, but the bubble could bust any moment in that area as well, and it would have dire consequences for the graphics cards, because not only would a manufacturer that would have invested heavily on more capacity be caught with its pants down, but all of that inventory of massively powerful graphics card, it's like we're talking 1080s, 1070s, 1060s, they're selling for twice the asking price. They would become useless to the miners, and they would go on the secondhand market immediately and with massive amounts. So it's really difficult for NVIDIA. I'm talking about NVIDIA because they have the high-end graphics cards more than AMD at the moment. So it's really difficult for NVIDIA to crack that nut and to solve that problem. They're encouraging the retailers to sell to gamers first as much as possible. They're trying to preserve their core audience very smartly, I think. But it's difficult because when you show up and you have a retailer willing to sell you something for $500 and you're telling them, I'll buy it for $1,000, I'm not sure you're going to sell to the guy who's paying you $500. So I don't know. It's a really hard problem, and I'm really hoping that something happens soon, because as long as we have this cryptocurrency craze going, if at least we knew it would go on forever, then the market would be clear and you could easily, well, not easily, but you could reliably ramp up production, and NVIDIA and other manufacturers could start doing even specialized chips, which some of them have. And you could, meet that demand, but that industry being what it is, it's so unpredictable that it's very difficult to engage that kind of capital and energy to meet that demand. So yeah, not an easy one, but at least NVIDIA is aware and trying to do things, and they are increasing the supply of graphics cards. So maybe if we wait another few months or maybe a year, we'll be able to buy those high-end graphics cards for a reasonable price. Another rumor about Metroid Prime 4, apparently Bandai Namco is the one developing it. We initially had reports that Bandai Namco Singapore was the one developing it through LinkedIn profiles and resumes and stuff like that are often not very subtle. But now we've heard that it's actually been taken over by Bandai Namco Japan. They have taken the lead on Metroid Prime 4, and Bandai Namco Singapore is working on another Switch game. So another example that big developers are getting very serious about Switch development, given its success. It's not very surprising. We've been talking about this for a while now. But yeah, it's another example of that. More somber news on that front, however. Somber. That's an exaggeration, but it will probably not come out in 2018. It seems the reports are talking about a release date of at least 2019, which is not very surprising to me. I definitely thought it would be in that window, and definitely not 2018. Another tidbit from Epic Games. They're shutting down Paragon, another victim of the hero shooter-ish type of game craze that started 2 years ago. They are not finding the success they were hoping for, and I think they are smartly thinking, all right, let's fold operations down. It's not working out. It didn't find its audience, and with the success of Fortnite, and more specifically the success of Fortnite Battle Royale, which is obviously PUBG competitor and free to play, they are going to focus on that. And Fortnite had 3.4 million concurrent users last weekend, which is kind of insane. 3.4 million is a huge amount. By comparison, PUBG had about, I don't want to say something silly, but I think it was 3.1 million. Maybe that's not accurate, but I think that was it. Obviously, PUBG is a paid game, so it's a very different proposition. But yeah, they've done a little bit more than PUBG. And that is significant. And by the way, talking about Battle Royale game, there's another one announced, Fear the Wolves by ex-Stalker developers. I think it's Vostok Games. Anyway, they're talking about this. There's also a developer saying they are going to make a Battle Royale game with like 1,000 concurrent players or something like that. We're entering the era of Me Too's Battle Royale games, which we were expecting, but also like gimmicky Battle Royale games. Like, we are the Battle Royale with this or with that type of thing, which is, again, not unexpected at all. So yeah, that's about it. I think there could be a couple of other little bits that I could mention, but that is the most important news from the past couple of weeks or so, maybe 3 weeks. I hope you enjoyed this little solo episode. I will try to be back on schedule, but I'm not certain how reliable I'll be able to do it because there are so many things happening, as you can imagine. I'm sure some of the parents in the audience are nodding their heads and understanding what I'm talking about. But I'll try to keep the Pixel feed as populated as possible, even when I don't do regular standard episodes for the show. I hope you enjoy Monster Hunter World and all of the other games that have been coming out. Please do let me know what you think of those games and the way I characterized and analyzed them in the comments or on YouTube or Twitter. And I will talk to you again very soon.